All right. Next, we're going to continue with Chapter 1, British North America, and we are going to look on Section 1.2. And what we're looking at today is foundations of representative government. Representative government was not developed in America. It comes with the colonists. They're going to bring more than just their language and a lot of their customs with them. They're going to bring their political ideas with them too. And a major one was their representative government. Ours is going to look different, but it is going to start out in a very similar manner. Okay, so the foundations, it begins a long time ago in 1215 with the Magna Carta. Magna Carta is literally the Great Charter. King John I was forced to sign the Magna Carta in 1215 after a civil war because of his treatment of the nobles. Wars cost money and he kept taxing them. They got tired of it, so they rebelled. The definition that you need to know for Magna Carta is that it limits the power of the British king. If you know, you can know it means the Great Charter, not the most important thing. Its importance is that this is the first limit on the power of the British king, okay? It prevented the king from imposing taxes without the consent of a council. We probably would see this better as no taxation without representation. That council later becomes Parliament, and Parliament is their representative body. Okay, so again, the foundations were there as far back as 1215. Next is the English Bill of Rights. This was signed in 1689, again after another it wasn't a civil war. This was the Glorious Revolution, and we see a new king and queen coming to Britain and taking the throne. But at this point, Parliament is going to ask them to sign the English Bill of Rights, which they do. This is going to expand the rights of Parliament and the people. So again, we can look at this as further limits of the monarchy. Okay, some of the things that the monarch agreed to here. They could not interfere with elections. Again, they could not impose taxes without Parliament's consent, which is what we saw with Magna Carta. That's not to say it was always obeyed or followed, but there you are. Also, citizens had the right to a speedy trial, no cruel and unusual punishment, and the right to petition the government. And again, as you can kind of get an idea of, our Constitution wasn't born out of nothing, okay? Our Constitution actually is based on what already existed, because the last one there at least makes its way into our Bill of Rights. The Mayflower Compact. This is what was signed when the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, and it was signed in 1620. And it was written to determine who would be in charge once the Pilgrims landed. They didn't land where they were supposed to, and so they had no form. They couldn't kind of rely on the Virginian government, so they needed their own plan. And it's going to establish an elected legislature, and it asserts that the government derives its power from the people of the colony. Okay, this is important because they agreed to create a new government and to follow the laws it established, and they agreed to make sure the new government would serve the common good. And so really what you're looking at is this is the first agreement for self-government in America. Yes, Virginia has a government, but it's not truly self-government. In the sense that this is what they wrote. So Mayflower Compact, big deal, okay? Common law isn't a document by no means, but this is government is based on tradition or past court decisions. There are no written statutes. There is no written constitution. Government bases what it does on what it's always done. you can use, and we use past court decisions to, it may not be law, but we can go back to a court decision to decide, oh, hey, this is what we do, and it's now law because the courts say it is. So that's what common law is. The importance is that all of those ideas and rights that we had seen contained in Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights are now considered to be a part of common law. Even though they don't have a written constitution, it's still rights that Englishmen have because it's a part of their common law. You also can look at the fact that there's a strong tradition of local government in England, which meant that colonists would be used to the idea of local self-government and expected in America. You could still be loyal British citizens who are loyal to the king while at the same time expecting a local government. Rule of law is, again, it's fairly easy here. Both government and the citizens are subject to the law, and the laws are fairly enforced. This is a key foundation for the U.S. government. We can look and see if it's really fair, if it's carried out fairly. The idea, though, here is that a law is written, and regardless of who you are, whether you're the president, whether you're a congressman, whether you're a judge, or whether you are a police officer, a mayor, or even just us, you are expected to follow the same law, and we are all supposed to be treated fairly. We can make arguments that, like I said, that this isn't carried out the way it should be, but the idea is there, okay? And our government, especially our early representative government, was based on this idea of rule of law. Social contract theory is a theory that was penned by John Locke. And in this, if a government fails to fulfill its role to serve citizens, the government should be replaced. And this is just a justification for the American Revolution, for independence. The idea here is that we the people, and it doesn't matter what country you're talking about, but we the people give up our ability to rule, and we're going to kind of give it to the government to do what's best in our interest. Now, I'm not saying that we give them full and total control, but we give up some of that power so that they will protect the rights that we have. And if they don't, we can overthrow them. Okay? Be interesting to see if anybody really believes in that today. Next, finally, is salutary neglect. And we talked about this earlier. This is one of your definitions, but the definition here that we can use is allowing the colonies to rule themselves. The colonists are allowed to set up their own local governments, and they become accustomed to the idea of self-rule, sovereignty. And the longer they make their own decisions, and this makes sense, it's hard for England to have too great of control just because of the distance. But the longer this goes on, the more they are used to it, and the less they're going to look for guidance from Britain. And so when Britain comes in later and begins to pass those taxes, which is what we're going to look at in Chapter 2, and they begin to take away what they see as their rights that we've just talked about in all of those documents and ideals that we talked about, it's going to create the conflict that leads to the American Revolution. And this, in the end, is going to, salutary neglect is really what allowed them to set up their own representative governments. Okay. Finally, we're getting down to our last 3 questions. And here you were asked to describe the House of Burgesses and how its representatives were chosen. First of all, the House of Burgesses had 2 houses. One was elected by the people, and one was appointed by the royal governor. Now, this is exactly how our current government is set up. This is how our current Congress, rather, is set up. We have 2 houses. The lower one is elected by the people, and until 1917, the upper one was appointed by the state government, whether it was the governor or the legislature, regardless. So again, we can look at our government today and look back and find examples where it existed successfully prior. So again, kind of begin to look at the idea that we weren't creating a government out of new cloth wholly. We borrowed from the past. We took what worked and let it go. Okay. Next is why is it described as limited self-government? We'll understand the royal governor is appointing one of the houses. Well, the royal governor is appointed by the king. Okay, so the people have no choice in who their governor is. And really, it doesn't have any bearing. They don't have any bearing on who their governor chooses to represent them in one of the houses of the House of Burgesses. So you do have self-government, and the people can still choose their representatives. But you also have that oversight by the king. Okay, so self-government is here, but it's limited. That, though, does not mean that the colonial legislatures had no recourse and that they had no power, because they were able to assert more influence than the governors in many cases. And one of the reasons for this was power of the purse. Know that term, power of the purse. Okay, so the governor is appointed by the king, but the king doesn't pay him. The colonial legislatures do with the taxes they raise. So if the governor wanted to be paid, he has to make sure he doesn't overly upset the legislature. So, in the end, the colonial legislatures still have power over the royal governor. I'm not saying that they could do whatever they want to do. I'm not saying that the royal governor still didn't look after the interests of the king, but the colonial legislature was not without recourse. Okay, go back through your notes, make sure that you have enough information, and hopefully you do. This, again, a lot of definitions. Know their definitions and their importance. Okay, and if you have any questions, please, by all means, write those down and come and ask me once you're done.